Hello everyone and welcome to IT Tutorials. In this video I'm going to show you everything you need to know to host your own website on a Windows server. Some of you may have noticed I've been gone for a while. I apologize for that. It's been a busy end of the year at our company. Didn't have much time to make tutorial videos. But now I'm back and I hope you enjoy this. First I'm going to go over domain and internet service provider requirements for the purpose of hosting your site. Then I'm going to show you how to install and configure IIS to support both ASP and PHP languages. After that I'm going to show you all the steps needed to create an SSL certificate in order to secure the web traffic between your servers and your clients. And lastly we're going to quickly review routing configurations for making sure that the web traffic gets to your web server. If you feel like you want to skip any of the sections, feel free to click the annotation on the screen and go directly to the section you're interested in. Alright, let's get started. In terms of your ISP, you need to make sure that you have sufficient upload bandwidth. What qualifies it to be sufficient depends on what you're planning to put in your website. If it's just going to be a simple website with no video streaming and such, you don't really need a speedy connection. But if there are going to be videos, high definition pictures, you need to have good upload speed. The next thing you need to have is a static IP. What that is basically your ISP assigns one address to your location. That address never changes. This usually comes with business packages, but some ISPs might not distinguish between business and residential, and that might just be a service which you need to request. Together with the static IP, you have to make sure that your ISP does not block port 80 and 443. Usually they unblock it as soon as you get a static IP, because most of the time people get static IPs for hosting websites and stuff. However, some ISPs don't. For example, I use Optimum, and for Optimum there is a configuration interface on their website where I can configure whether my port 80 and 443 are going to be blocked for my IP. So you have to make sure that you enable port 80 and any other ports that you might need, like port 25 in Optimum's case. That's for mail server hosting, so I need to open that since I'm hosting a mail server myself. And that's pretty much it for ISP. Then the next thing, of course, you need to purchase a domain. I myself use several domain companies to purchase the domain names, but at the end I ended up staying with GoDaddy because I think they have the relatively best service. So basically you just search for a domain, and if it's available they'll let you know and then you can buy it. They're relatively cheap. It's like $10 for a whole year, and all that does is it gives you the ownership over that domain. And then what you can do is you can point to the domain to go to one server or another. And what you'll have to do is simply point it to your static IP, and you're able to host the website on that server that has the static IP. But we'll talk more about that when we get to routing web traffic to the web server. Okay, now let's go into the installation and configuration of IIS. Before we go into installing IIS, let's first download some prerequisites. These are for PHP only, so if you're not planning to host PHP sites, just click on annotation on the screen to skip ahead to the actual installation. So for PHP, we hit downloads link in php.net, and then we hit Windows, binaries, and source right here. And it actually has two prerequisites here on the side, 32-bit and 64-bit, but from my experience I believe you only need the 32-bit. But to be on the safe side, just download and install both of them, which is what we are gonna do. And then we will need the zip file itself. For IIS we need the non-thread safe, and the zip file is sufficient, so let's download that. And let's save it in our default downloads directory. and let's download and install this. And let's download and install that. Okay, while PHP is downloading, let's go on and start installing our IIS. In Server Management Console, right-click on Roles and hit Add Role. Then hit Next and pick the web server IIS. Hit Next again and Next again. Now the only thing we need for PHP is actually the CGI module. And for ASP, you probably will need ASP Net and ASP, but Net is extended functionality of ISP, so it's up to you if you want it or not. These are the only two settings that you need to enable extra to what's already enabled, and that's all you need to run PHP or ASP site. However, you might want to look into some other options that are provided here. One of the useful ones that I used before is the HTTP redirection, which allows you to redirect a URL permanently from one location to another, and another feature is the IP and domain restrictions, which allows you to block access to the servers by IP addresses. Many people say that PHP doesn't work well with IIS. I tend to disagree because I have about 15 to 20 systems running IIS with PHP without any flaws, and it even has URL rewriting, just like Apache server does. Of course, it needs to be downloaded as a separate module, but it exists. So I think IIS is just as good running PHP as Apache server is. So let's just hit install, and I'll be back when it's done. Okay, now let's go on and configure it. Right, so we just expand web services, IIS node, and our web server. Now ASP is enabled by default, and you don't really have to do any configurations to run ASP website from this point on. You can just drop your ASP files in the web folder here and it will run. For PHP, however, we do need to do a few configurations. So if you click on server root and you go into the handler mappings, then you want to click add module mapping, and here you do star.php module will be the fast CGI module. Oops. Fast CGI module, and executable will be the PHP file, the PHP exe file, which we downloaded. So let's just extract it. You can really put it anywhere you want, but I tend to put it in CPHP. Alright, and here it is, and the file we're interested in is actually phpcgi.exe. So if we go back to IIS, c php-cgi.exe, and name, you can really put in anything here, and then hit OK, and yes. Another thing we need is to set up the default document so that IIS knows which document to present. It has a few, so ASP, like I mentioned before, will work by default, as will plain HTML pages and ASPX. Alright, so let's just give it a test to make sure that ASP actually is working on the server. So if we right click on the default website and hit explore, let's just create a sample page. Let's delete everything that's here to begin with. and then right click new text file, and let's call it default ASP. Alright, and then we right click on this and hit edit, and let's do something simple like this, simple echo command. Save it and go back to IIS and hit browse button, and there you go, ASP is working. Now let's go back here and let's add a default document for PHP. Let's do add index.php, and let's test if our PHP is working as well. So once again, go back to the web root. It created web config because I added index.php just to this site. If I added it here, it would be available for all sites by default. Just one little thing about IIS, so just to keep in mind. So let's delete the ASP and let's create index.php this time. Index.php, and here we will also do something simple. We call a function which should print our PHP information, and once again back to IIS, hit browse, and there you go, our PHP is working as well and gives us all the information about the PHP that's on the system. That's about it from what I can see. PHP has a whole bunch of settings that involve security and debugging, and all those can be configured in the PHP folder. There's a php.ini file. They have two versions of it, production and development. Neither of them are active right now, so PHP uses all the default settings. But what you do is you basically make a copy of this and rename it to just php.ini. And then if you look at it, it will have a lot of settings which you should go through and set up the way your environment requires. One thing is about execution time of the script in PHP with conjunction with IIS. Well, let's see if I can find it right now. Yes, it should be somewhere here, I believe, or not. Here, execution time, and it's set to 30 seconds here. However, IIS also controls how long the script can execute, so this time will only take effect if IIS's configured time is longer than this time. In IIS, this is configured in CGI settings, so if you go to the web server and you click on fast CGI settings, and this is our CGI script, PHP CGI, and you double click on that, activity timeout. This is how much time IIS will allow for the PHP script to run, regardless of what you put in the PHP INI. So if you put 500 seconds in PHP INI file, for example, and you leave 70 in fast CGI settings, the script will terminate after 70 seconds. Just something to keep in mind as well. Alright, now let's talk about SSL certificates. If your website is going to be handling some sensitive information such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, or other private information, you may want to keep the web traffic secure, and the way to accomplish that is via the SSL certificates. This also helps to secure the transfer username and password over the internet so that hackers cannot easily find the passwords for any user that's registered in your site if you will have the registration options. Alright, and to do that, first we need to create a certificate request. So you click on the server node and you click server certificates, and then you click create a certificate request. Basically what this does is creates a private key, and then you need to use that private key to sign to create a certificate using a certification authority. Most certification authorities ignore everything that you put in here except for the common name. Common name should be exactly what the URL of your website is going to be, because this is what's going to determine whether the certificate is valid for the domain or not. So let's say if your domain is www.itsupportme.com, in the common name you would have to put www.itsupportme.com. So let's just put invalid data because it doesn't really matter. And then we hit next, and then you want to leave the Microsoft RSA service provider, and the key length you have to find out from your registration authority what kind of key length they support. GoDaddy supports, at the time of making of this video, up to 4,000 bit length. The larger key, the harder is to crack it, so the bigger the better. So pick that and then choose where you want to save the request file. So just save it on desktop. Alright, and hit finish. Now this key is going to get generated. Alright. And there's our key. The next thing you need is to actually purchase the certificate. Like I mentioned before, I use GoDaddy because I think they have great rates and stuff. So you go to My Products, SSL certificates, and here they have a few options for you. The most basic one with single domain is $69, well $70 for a year. So it's kind of pricey, but it makes your site more secure. So once you purchase that, they allow you to, of course, create a certificate, and what you need for that is the private key you created in IIS. It is pretty much self-explanatory. It's a step-by-step process. Once you do the purchase from your control panel, you just copy and paste the certificate request that you created in the IIS, and then the GoDaddy processes it, does a few domain verifications, and issues you a certificate. Once you get the certificate, you need to go back to IIS, hit certificates, and do complete a certificate request. Here you navigate to the file, the certificate file. From GoDaddy it's going to be CRT, but it doesn't matter, just hit show all files and pick the certificate file, and you're going to be done. Friendly name is just a name for your reference, so you can put anything here really. I'm just gonna quickly create a self-signed certificate so that I can show the next step in the process. Okay, so and then once you complete the steps I described, you'd see something like that with a friendly name being here, whatever you put in. So then you need to go to your website configuration and hit on bindings, and then hit add, and then drop down HTTPS, and then select the certificate that you got, that you just imported, and hit view, hit OK, and hit close, and you're all done. Now, of course, since this is a self-signed certificate, it's gonna be red with certificate errors and stuff. But if you have a real certificate, then it will just go directly to the site. Okay, that pretty much covers IIS and SSL. Next comes the actual routing and setting up your domain to point to the right address. So first, the static IP that you get from your ISP, you need to set it up in here. So by default, most routers use dynamic IP and DHCP to register on the network. So you would have to set a static IP and provide the IP address, gateway, and DNS servers that your ISP gave to you. Next, you will need to set up the port forwarding. So if you go to port forwarding, most routers call it port forwarding. It might be called differently on your router, and you would basically create, let's say, a web forward, and then you need ports 80 and ports 443. 80 is the non-secure and 443 is the secure traffic. And then IP address. This would be the IP address of your web server. Once again, internally your web server needs to have a static IP address, because if that changes, your web server will stop working. again. So let's say our web server is 192.168.1.77, for example. And that's it. And then you hit save, and that forwards the ports. Then you also need to point your domain to your static IP address. So once again, we go back to GoDaddy, and then we go to my account. And if you bought it from GoDaddy, this is exactly what you would do. If you bought it somewhere else, you'll need to launch the domain management console. And then in the domain management console, you would go into your domain. And what you're looking for is the DNS manager, which is down here. You hit launch. And here you basically need to create a record which will point to your IP. This is one of the domains that I own, and my IP address, my static IP address from my servers is 173.220.442, and I have www pointing to the @ is the root of the domain, so www is the same as just pingtool.net in my case, and they all point to 192.168.2. Now let's say we want another alternative web server, right? And we could do something like this. www2, let's say people will have to type in www2 to get to another web server of ours, and then another IP address, 173.220.42.7. And now whenever people try to enter www2.pingtool.net in their browser, it'll redirect them to this IP address, which is gonna be, in our example, a web server of our own located at that address. We hit save zone, and that's it. Your changes have been saved. Of course, I don't want this because that does not exist, so we're just gonna save it back. And that covers pretty much everything, every aspect of hosting your web server. Please feel free to ask any questions. I'm sure I missed something in there. This tutorial was a real pain. I did about 10 recordings with huge failures, so I started over and over and over again, and it was just very frustrating. I really hope it helped you guys. Please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. And once again, thanks for watching. Bye.